you get your foot in the door. Make sure you make the right contacts when you're in there. Use that as an opportunity to network. Go and say hello, hi, thank you for letting me in your law firm. You know, just do, even if it's a 5-minute conversation.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Middlesex University Mooting Society's YouTube channel. My name is Najat Mustafa, and today with me here we have Thenji Moyo. Yes, hi. So she's an employment law lawyer at Gately, and I'm so excited that I got the opportunity to interview her and to answer all your burning questions and my burning questions about employment law. So Thenji, how are you?
Fabulous. Thank you so much for coming to our offices to meet us. Excited to be on your podcast.
Thank you so much for allowing us to annoy you with all our questions.
No worries.
So I think the first one, that's like a very basic kind of setup one, is can you describe your journey that got you to this point of working in employment law, and what pushed you to work here in employment law?
In this space. Okay, so really good question. I first was introduced to employment law academically. So I think during my degree there was an employment law course which I found interesting, but it wasn't like a passion or anything at that stage. Then when I did the LPC, I really remember thinking, oh, this is an area of interest. And our university arranged for vacation placements with law firms in London. And I was lucky enough to go into a law firm and get real good experience. It was only a 2-3 week vacation placement at one of the leading trade union law firms. And then I think my passion for it really started. I was fortunate enough to be called back after I finished the academic stage to come and be a paralegal. So I went straight into employment. So even though when I did the training contract, I know training contracts are supposed to expose you to other areas of law, I dabbled in them, but I was quite dead set at that stage.
So it's not saying you got like a very big focus on that from the get-go to the beginning.
Yeah, so that's all I do. And you know, when people ask about employment law, I think it's so varied as well. So you get different types of matters that you're dealing with, right? So no 2 days are the same. Today I'm dealing with discrimination, tomorrow I'm dealing with workplace safety, the next day I'm dealing with compensation and benefits. So it's varied, extremely varied.
That's great. And I think that something that I always tend to look at with employment law is that, you know, again, like you said, no 2 days are the same. So then do you see that as more of an advantage, or does that kind of also have its disadvantages as well?
For me personally, I prefer that. I mean, I've worked with many lawyers, so I see what the corporate lawyers do and property lawyers do, and in my view, it's quite repetitive. So our job isn't a repetitive job. So, you know, one day, like I said, I'm doing a workplace investigation, looking at fraud in the workplace. Tomorrow I'm dealing with bullying and harassment, and then discrimination. And also, let's look at the impact of employment law. You can deal with it on a very small scale. So some of my clients are, let's say, an individual who's unpaid, and we're dealing with, you know, getting that compensation and bonuses. So that is life-changing for someone. And then if you look at it in a more kind of high-level macro scale, when you're talking about, you know, changing the regime in the DIFC, I was involved in, you know, I'm on the board where they've taken away end of service gratuity and replaced it with dues, which is the DIFC employee workplace savings scheme. So just involved in legislation and changing benefits on a wider scale. I think that's great. So that's the variation that I like. But yes, you're still a specialist when it comes to being an employment lawyer. It's just that there's such a wide range in terms of the activities that you do.
So then when looking at the different types of activities that you do, because I know you said you work with corporate clients, but then you also have individual clients.
Yes.
Which kind of cases do you find to be the most rewarding? You're like, wow, like this is what I really set out to do. And why do you find them rewarding?
Do you know what? It's a really good question. I mean, with corporates, it's also just as rewarding as individuals.
Really?
Well, yes, and I'll explain why. With corporates, if I'm involved in changing work culture, and if I'm involved in going in, training on bullying and harassment, introducing policies, assisting with corporate culture, you know that you're making an impact, within a global organization.
Helping quite a lot of people.
So you're helping a lot of people, right? On an individual scale, of course, it's more intense, it's more emotional. I've had many clients crying, breaking down in my office because, when we're talking about employment, we're talking about someone's security, we're talking about their livelihood, we're talking about their sense of identity. So if you have a job that you thought was secure and that gets stripped off completely from you unexpectedly,
You're shaken, obviously.
then you're shaken, right? So, I've had clients, come and say, look, I'm having suicidal thoughts, I haven't been able. Yes, this is real life here.
Yeah.
We're talking about anxiety, we're talking about adjustment disorders. So we know that employment is core to a person's being. And look, we're in Dubai. Let's not forget that Dubai is an organization that is not an organization, it's a country where it's 95% expats
Yeah, you're right.
in the workforce, right? So, look at people coming in to DXB, to Dubai, and really kind of making an impact. So their whole life depends on their job, right?
And their families.
And their families,
That's
got
true.
children in school. So employment is extremely important. It is the point that I'm making.
So then, going back to what you said about, people having very intense thoughts, and there's crying, and there's stress, and there's anxiety, how do you, in your place as their lawyer and as someone that's supposed to represent them, how do you help them, and how do you deal with being able to kind of calm them down and deal with the whole emotional aspect of those cases?
It is really difficult. I think when you're dealing with an individual who is going through a very difficult time, you need to show empathy. You need to be able to listen. You need to be able to make the right recommendations. Like even personally, maybe you need to seek professional help. I can see you're kind of struggling on that side. In some cases, you can make the recommendation. Perhaps you need to seek medical help. Sometimes they tell you they haven't slept for weeks, or they haven't told their families they've lost their job, and I'm the first person that they've spoken to. How do people deal with that?
Stress of that.
So it's wider than just, okay, you've got a claim for discrimination, because you're dealing with real life emotions, right? But as an employment lawyer, you also need to make sure you don't get sucked into the emotion of it, because you've got a job to do. You're not a therapist, you're actually a lawyer. So you need to be able to strip away all the emotion and just look at the case. Is there a case here that has either prospects of success, or is it a weak case? Sometimes you need to tell the client, actually, you don't really have a case that I would recommend that you pursue. And I think individuals really do value honesty and a real assessment, because I think there are experiences where people have taken legal counsel and they run the most hopeless cases and spend a lot of money, because legal fees are not cheap. So I think it's really about taking a kind of pragmatic approach, and being empathetic when it comes to individuals. It's a very, very, very sensitive area.
Almost like family law in a way, where it's a lot of emotion maybe, but then you have to again back up and look at.
You have to back up, look and see, is there a case? But they're extremely rewarding when you're able to help an individual who might have left their employment badly, who might have been working in a toxic work environment. So it is extremely rewarding when it comes to our ability to resolve a lot of the cases. A lot of our cases don't go all the way to court. We're able to resolve them at the kind of pre-litigation stage. So that's usually a good result, because it saves money for everyone, it saves time, and then you're quickly able to resolve the issue, whatever it is.
That's great. So then, usually when you look at those type of cases with discrimination, for example, so I feel like this is something that a lot of people, when they think of employment law, they think like, yes, I'm going to be able to help fight for employees who have been discriminated against, whether it's based on their gender, their race, their religion. But in cases, because I feel like if we have to talk about reality, a lot of the times discrimination tends to be very under the rug, subtle, a lot of side comments, things like that. How does that affect like whether you can win the case or not? Because you can't go up and be like, you said something to me, and it's like, no, I didn't mean it like that.
Yeah.
Unless it's very obvious.
Obvious.
Yeah.
No, you're right. I think discrimination cases are very difficult to win because they are so factual and sometimes quite personal. So even though it might have been offensive to me, it might not be offensive to you. So is it discrimination? And you're right. I think a lot of the issues that you know, people deal with in the workplace can be microaggressions.
Yeah.
So if they're microaggressions, how do you then build it to a matter or a case that we can deal with and we can assist you with? So that's usually a problem. But what I find in practice is a lot of by the time a client comes to the office, they've actually done some good work. You know, they've recorded the issues, they've spoken to someone, they've spoken to HR, there's a kind of picture that we're able to build. And, you know, for a case to be something that we would recommend that you run, you need to be able to objectively say, does this case have reasonable prospects of success? Then we need to ask ourselves, what is discrimination? It's where someone says that they've suffered less favorable treatment because of the characteristics of race, religion, disability. So you need to be able to build that picture, maybe find a comparator, so be able to say, okay, well, you treated this way because you're a woman, because you were Muslim, and so forth. If we can build that picture, then, you know, there's something to put forward.
Yeah, and then there's success in the case.
And then there's success in the case. But yes, you need evidence for everything.
Of course, because then you need to build up on the case, be able to win.
Yeah.
But then when you have cases with corporate clients, or when you're working with corporate clients, what are the biggest challenges there, and then how do you like work with them and able to tackle those challenges?
With corporates, a lot of the work that we do as employment lawyers are, you know, to do with training, to do with drafting good policies, to do with giving advice. Many corporates value employment lawyers' input because we've seen the worst case scenario, right? So if we're able to go in, let's say, for example, they're thinking of terminating someone because of, I don't know, low performance or poor performance, we're able to guide them and say, right, okay, just so that we don't end up with a claim, let's make sure we stick to the process. So, you know, invite them in, find out what's going on. Sometimes you're a poor performer and it's because of a disability or something personal going on in your life. So we advise them on the processes to follow so that they ensure that they've got an objective, good procedure that aligns with international best practice, which helps the corporate as well, you know, put them in a position of being a good employer so that when you do terminate anyone, you're say, look, we went through that full process. We gave the employee all the support they required. We gave them the opportunity to improve. What did we do? We put in these measures, but you know what? 3-6 months later, there was no... Absolutely. And then absolutely, the corporate is in a position to terminate. They've taken good advice, they've followed a good procedure, and really an employee can't challenge that. The problem that you have is sometimes you have corporates that don't follow the process, and then there's issues. So the work that we do with corporates is extremely important because it's more, I find, more proactive than reactive.
It's amazing like, to see how, because obviously if you can take care of it from the top, then there's less likelihood that, you know, these cases are going to arise, wrongful termination, things like that. So, well, I didn't realize that the impact even came through corporate and then it funnels down.
It does indeed.
Yeah. I think another question that we wanted to ask is that oftentimes us as law students, I know like from first-hand experience, we're constantly told that the most important skills that you can have are being able to be good at legal research, you need to be good at drafting memoranda, and these sort of like basic foundation skills. But then as more and more people are beginning to study law and get into this field and things like that, those skills don't really help you stand out anymore. It's like, well, everyone can do that. Like, you're not special. Exactly. So, you know, especially for the next upcoming year of law students or for third years like me, I know that I want to know more about like what soft skills will help me really stand out. So what soft skills specifically for employment law have helped you like really succeed and get to your clients and resolve the issues that you like face on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think you're right. Technical skills are important, but they're not everything.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of Scott's presentations, being able to put together podcasts that reach your target audience, make you stand out.
Yeah.
For students, articles that they're putting together, blogs. We're in a space where I feel that as students, you have more access to the decision makers than we ever could have imagined. We just didn't have access. How are we going to get to the managing part? How are they going to notice me? Now you've got LinkedIn, where almost everyone, will at least flick through. And if you have an article or a video or some sort of, contribution that makes sense, you're bound to kind of catch the attention of people that you want to, be making contact with.
And build those connections.
Absolutely. There's so many networking events in Dubai. Dubai is not too big, like say in London or UK when you need to travel to go to certain places. Here, it's pretty small. You can get anywhere in like 20 to 30 minutes.
Sure.
So there's so many events, so many opportunities, networking opportunities. I always see sometimes interns coming into law firms and working perhaps with the lawyer that they've been paired with, and then they leave without speaking to the managing partner, for example. And I think that's such a shame. It's a lost opportunity. I always say, if you get your foot in the door, make sure you make the right contacts when you're in there. Use that as an opportunity to network. Go and say hello, hi, thank you for letting me in your law firm. What do you do? Even if it's a 5-minute conversation, it's a 2-minute conversation. When you then send that email or you send that, LinkedIn message, it's kind of like, oh, I remember that. Look for opportunities to go into industry. It's not just about private practice, especially when you're a student. Go in-house. Go into the legal department and try and get some experience. Like I said, I went into the law firm for 2 weeks and I ended up staying with them for 6 years.
It's amazing.
Exactly. So, you never know where your next opportunity is going to come from.
I know a lot of students, like especially myself, I felt this when I did my internship last year. I was so nervous. Like I walked in, I'm like, I'm just this little law student. They don't know who I am. Like I'm just gonna sit and do everything they say, and just not really go farther and push myself, like you said. So, like, have you been in that position before?
Yeah.
And what advice would you give?
I was in that exact same position, and that's why I always tell that story. So I went into a law firm, and I remember sitting with the support staff, and I think the senior lawyers were kind of allocated to come and get me to go to tribunal or whatever it was at the time. But I came to the last day of my vacation placement. I was talking to one of the colleagues, and I was like, oh, I need to go and say hi to the partner. Do you think I should? And she was like, absolutely. And I was like, oh, I don't want to disturb them. They're so busy and all of that. But I finally mustered the courage to go and speak to the head of employment on my last day. And his first point was, I was wondering when you were going to come over and say hello.
Oh, no.
Exactly. So, and I was like, that would have been a lost opportunity because I had a conversation which then led to full-time employment and qualification. So it's really important to try, and obviously you need to sense check the appropriate timings. People are very busy. Sure. You need to be able to read the room. But if there is an opportunity to say hello, you're in the building, you're in the office, you need to make sure that you completely maximize that opportunity.
And then again, like the worst thing that can happen is that they say no, so then you just move on to the next. Yeah, so you can always have the confidence to try again. And I know that another thing that students have kind of been more just like curious about, not necessarily worried, but just curious to see that with technology becoming more and more advanced and more integrated into law firms and into employment law itself, how do you think the cases that you see today are going to be affected by technology? Like, how do you think the way that they're resolved, the way that they're handled are going to change?
Look, I think we're in a dynamic environment anyway. Everything is changing. One of the things I say about employment law is it's one of the areas of law that will always move with whatever's happened with the time.
Yeah.
You know, so 2 years ago we were talking about COVID, the pandemic, and hybrid working, and now we're talking about the impact of AI on the workforce, right? So technology, it has to be integrated into what we do. There's questions within law firms: are we going to integrate AI into our systems? Because actually we're going to get to a stage where we're forced to, and if we're not, everyone else is. You know, you'll be left behind. So we are constantly moving with technology, with the developments as they happen. But obviously, because we are a regulated legal profession, we need to you know, adapt with caution, and making sure it's within the correct you know, parameters. But absolutely, we are definitely evolving.
And I know that a lot of students are also looking at the way that employment law has evolved here in the UAE and then in the UK, because a lot of them tend to look at the UK and it's like, oh, new opportunity, I can possibly work there. And I know that you've had experience working in the UK and also here. Would you say that the way that employment law has developed here is a lot more fast-paced or a lot slower compared to the UK? Like, what are kind of the big differences that you've noticed between them?
Yeah, well, I mean, the most obvious is it's a common law jurisdiction, and we're talking of a civil law jurisdiction. So moving from a common law jurisdiction to civil law jurisdiction, there were obvious differences, like, you know, lack of precedent and so forth. But not only that, I think in the UK, a lot of the principles that we were dealing with are very established. So, you know, like having discrimination in the employment law, bullying and harassment and so forth, all of that have been established principles, and there is a lot of case law.
There's more, it's more set in stone.
It's more set in stone, and we can see how the courts are going to decide. Whereas in the UAE, the labor law only changed last year. So for the first time we're seeing these principles, but it's still very exciting because I feel we're now at a new kind of stage where there's, you know, development of legislation. We're still waiting to see how the courts are going to decide when it comes to bullying, when it comes to harassment, when it comes to discrimination. We don't have case law. So it's an exciting time to be here. I think you know, the UAE is, you know, dead set on making sure that it is an international player of choice, and is a jurisdiction where people want to come and live and work. And to really do that, the environment needs to keep up with international best practice standards. And that's why we're here. We're here, we are fulfilled, we are getting more exposure than perhaps we could have gotten in other jurisdictions because of the fast pace.
So then, would your advice change for students if they were looking to work in employment law in the UK versus here, or would you say that it's sort of, you can have the same approach regardless of which jurisdiction?
Yeah, I think you can have the same approach. I think it's more about your preference. It's more about you know, I enjoyed working in the UK. I enjoyed training there, and the exposure. I do think that the experience that I got from the UK has been extremely beneficial. So, you know, whilst equal pay or you know, discrimination, bullying, harassment are new principles in the employment law, they're not new principles in the other jurisdiction we have practiced. So that experience is critical now here. But I find lawyers who have trained here to be brilliant lawyers as well. It's just about getting the right exposure, working for the right law firms, where you can get, you know, a varied caseload to build you up to be a good lawyer.
I'm surprised to hear that, because usually the way that most students think about their careers is that I have to go abroad, I have to leave Dubai and go get exposure somewhere that's a lot more established, like the UK. Or the US, for example, somewhere else. So when I come back here, it's like, oh, look, you're this established lawyer that has all this experience.
I can't take anything away from having international experience. You know, I've lived in 4 countries for a long time. I've lived in South Africa, I've lived in Zimbabwe, I've lived in the UK, and I'm living here now. So I find that the exposure that I've had to law in each jurisdiction helps me one way or the other now whether it is if I'm dealing with a client from Africa and I kind of know the landscape and I know the issues that are there. Does that make me a better lawyer? Absolutely, because I completely understand the issues that they're dealing with. If I'm dealing with a client from the UK, I completely understand the issues. So I think it's more from a point of exposure as opposed to which one is better. It's more about opening the mind and having wide experience. Absolutely, I would never say to someone just stay here. Absolutely, the world is your oyster. Go.
I think that would be a lot more exciting because then it's like you get to go and have all this exposure to people in different jurisdictions. And I know that another question that they definitely wanted me to ask you is for the UAE specifically, let's say, you want to work in employment law, you want to get your foot in the door, as you said, but you just feel like, there's so many other candidates that are exactly like you. So what advice would you specifically give to just students that are looking to saturate themselves here and look for work here?
It's really just finding a way to distinguish yourself from your competitors. Whether it's experience, whether it's content, whether it's networking events, like I said earlier. It's really just fine, and then good grades, of course. Getting yourself noticed within your university. I know at Middlesex we were just on a call just yesterday about introducing a program to 2 or 3 of your top performers with a major in-house opportunity. So make sure that you're one of the candidates who are considered for these opportunities. Those opportunities are there, and I feel also students don't seek the help that's actually there. I like I said, I got into my first law firm because I went to the careers office, and she said, "Oh, you've got great grades, but you've got no experience." And I was like, "I know," and she's like, "Okay, let's give you 2 weeks then, see what happens." That became the next 6 years of my life because I actually did that. Everybody else had the opportunity to walk through that door on campus, but how many people actually took it up? So those are the opportunities, and when you get through the door, what are you doing with that next opportunity? Are you making sure that they remember you before you leave?
Talk to the partner. My next internship, I'm like, I have to go talk to him.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I know a lot of students are very nervous to enter the careers office, but I always hear stories about like this person went and look at this amazing internship that they got, the connections and things like that. So I know that a lot of students are going to take your advice.
It's available to you, for you.
Yeah, I just think that they have to muster the courage to do it, but once they do, then hopefully they will. And our final question, thank you for listening to all my questions, is what final advice would you just have for all the students, like all the law students at Middlesex University Dubai, as just kind of general advice, whether it's life advice or about law itself?
I mean, I've met a lot of the students. I've been with Middlesex myself for about 6-7 years, so I've met the caliber of students that are there. I think it's great just to kind of keep doing what you're doing. You're doing well in the mooting competitions. Get involved. There are some students who just don't get involved. It's about getting involved, making sure that when you leave that university, you've taken advantage of all the opportunities that are there for you. It's very easy to go into university, go to class and go home without looking at it holistically. What opportunities are there for me? Who do I need to speak to? Let me speak to, head of law and find that she'll kill me now, and get some suggestions. But, make sure you're fully networked so that when you leave your university, you're in a position to say, actually, I didn't leave any stone unturned. Within, and I spoke to the careers lady, I went for the internship, I went for the mooting competition. When you get to the mooting competition, did you make connections on an international level? What are you doing with those connections? So it's always thinking about how to maximize the opportunities that you have.
I know a lot of students, sorry, just one more question.
Go on.
I know a lot of students, like the mindset that they have in law school is like, mooting, all of those extra things, they're important, but the most important thing is my grades. I have to be, I have to get a first, I have to be one of the people that gets second, I have to be this. Do you agree with that mindset, or is it more of like you said earlier, grades get you in the door, but if you're just academic, what else do you offer?
Yeah, I prefer a well-rounded individual because I recognize, especially in the workplace, if you have interpersonal skills, for example, and I know that I can't go for an event, but I can say, can you just go and represent for me and speak to people? I know you're going to network. I know you're going to sell the firm. I know you're going to come back and say, actually, there are these 3 opportunities. Whereas I might have someone who's brilliant technically, but who actually isn't able to, build
Converse,
absolutely to build contacts and get clients, because that's what it is, right? Especially when you're in private practice. So being a well-rounded individual, I think, is in this day and age more attractive. And whilst they say, I think somebody said, if you're good technically, it counts to about maybe 50 to 60%, but you need the rest, right? You need the rest of it, because at the end of the day, we get to a stage where when we meet clients, our legal technical skills are taken as read. It's about whether they like you.
Exactly, that's the thing.
Whether they like you.
You could have all the grades, you could be good again at legal drafting.
Do they like you?
But if you're not a people person, I feel
exactly. Yeah, and are you going to give practical advice?
Exactly.
Are you going to actually make life easier for them? That's what they're looking for at the end of the day.
So Thenji, another question that I have is that what kind of message would you like to send to the members of Middlesex University Mooting Society? Like what sort of advice or kind of just message would you like to send?
Well, I'm actually so inspired by the Mooting Society because I wish I had done that, more of that. When I was a student. I did 1 moot, I think. Thoroughly enjoyed it, but I think the experience that you get, the exposure that you get, is really something that you can carry forward into your careers going forward. So I would encourage you to get involved in as many competitions as you can and continue to profile yourselves in the manner that you are. And very best of luck to all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.